The fundamental belief is that human beings are a part of nature. And the role of science is to investigate that. And so there isn't then a separation between science and religion, right? If you think of religion as an investigation or a study or an appreciation of the values of the human being and how we fit in with the cosmos, then there's no separation anymore between science and religion. That the more we do science, the more we can have a religious viewpoint. And the more we do religion well, the more integration there is with science.
In this conversation, we are going to explore how you can find flow, effortless ease, how you can understand the ways of nature, and in particular, its spontaneity. Like, you're a spontaneous being. If you're in the shower and have ideas randomly coming up, where does that spontaneity come from? Where else do we see it in nature? We're going to explore some of these ideas. We have the privilege of talking to Professor Brian Bruya, who is a comparative philosopher studying philosophies from around the world, particularly specializing in ancient Chinese philosophy. He's been really supportive of my journey, a mentor, and I'm really excited for you to listen to today's conversation. Professor Brian Bruya, great to be in conversation with you.
Hi, George. Good to talk to you again.
So I have got into a habit starting my conversations in this podcast by asking a question, which is, what do you talk about that you think is really important that often isn't talked about in today's society?
I don't know that philosophy is talked about a lot in society, so I wonder if everything I talk about is is not talked about in society. If you're talking about popular society or news, standard news media, I'm kind of frustrated now that you mention it, that a lot of what we talk about in philosophy about just being civil, about how to have a conversation, about how to have a back and forth, how to have a disagreement, about how to verify sources, about how to have a proper argument. A lot of this is ignored. So there's a lot.
Yeah, such important. We don't have to be the same to get along, and to disagree is important. It's like conflict is inevitable, but violence optional, both verbal and physical. And there are skills that we can develop in order to still communicate without needing to resort to that.
Right.
And I'd love to really dive deep into your book, which is about the spontaneity of nature. And for those that don't know about the book and don't know about your work, how would you start people's journey of understanding Suran, nature?
Right. So I've done something in this book that is a little bit unorthodox. A lot of times when we approach Asian philosophy, we take an idea that's familiar to us and we say, do they have it? Like the notion of freedom or free will. Did the Chinese talk about that? And if they didn't, we think that they're somehow deficient, that they missed something important that we found important. I turn the tables in this book, and I look at a concept that's prominent in ancient Chinese philosophy, and I ask, do we have that in the West? And if we don't, why not? If we have approximations, what is the difference? And the concept is ziran, as you said. Ziran in contemporary Chinese is often translated as nature, but the word goes back to the classical Chinese language and doesn't mean nature as such, but means something more like the processes of nature, something like naturally. And the way that I usually introduce this is to think of a seed. And if you put a seed on the table here and say, grow, the seed's not going to listen to you. If you want the seed to grow, what you need to do is you need to give it the conditions that are appropriate for growth. You need to put it in soil, add a little water, some sunlight. And then from its own resources and the synergy with its environment, it will grow. And that's ziran in a nutshell, if you will. So it's this process of growth that we see in nature broadly, but also in human beings. And this is the key, one of the key ideas in the book is that human beings are part of this natural process, not separate from it.
And what's missing in the Western canon that doesn't talk about that spontaneous growth?
Right. So in the book, I trace several notions in Western philosophy that are approximations of Ziran that seem to be something like it, but are importantly distinct. And one of those is the very concept of free will. So free will in Western languages, one of the terms for it is spontaneity. This is a philosophical term in contemporary English. When we say somebody's spontaneous, we often mean impulsive. And that's not the philosophical sense. The philosophical sense of spontaneity actually has two aspects. And the aspects are, importantly, contradictory. So one way of talking about spontaneity is the way I just mentioned, as free will. And free will in the West has been conceptualized as the human being being divorced from nature. So nature was often seen, and still is by many today, as deterministic, meaning that there's a cause and effect in the world that we can participate in, but we're also subject to. And if you think of, say, a billiard ball on a billiards table, once that ball's in motion, the only thing that's going to stop it is by affecting it directly. It can't, from its own resources, change or get out of the causality that it's a part of. What free will suggests, and spontaneity as free will suggests, is that human beings can be separate from this process. We can escape from nature. And the way that's often conceptualized is that there's this vanishing point of free will somewhere. We don't know. Nobody's ever ever pinpointed it. Although I think Descartes said that it's associated with the pineal gland. But that's physical, right? So it must also be associated or subject to the same laws. But free will, the very concept of free will suggests that there's a separation between human beings and nature. So that's one notion of spontaneity. The second notion of spontaneity
Can I just ask with that, it's like because it's quite fun, it's like the same sort of thing with consciousness where, okay, so spontaneity came from the human beings, and like Descartes would say, you know, we have a spirit inside of us that makes us different from the animals and therefore superior. And if we don't take that dualistic view, then even in the mechanistic view, maybe we grant a monkey spontaneity where they can, you know, make tools and get termites out of a termite mound. Okay, that seems creative and not just genetic programming. And then we've got to kind of like run the evolutionary tape back. It's like, okay, if there's spontaneity in us, and it's not just a linear thing, but like monkeys, let's keep going back in time. You know, there has to be a point at which the non-spontaneous started being spontaneous, and this brute emergence of spontaneousness or intelligence or consciousness is a bit of a hard problem.
Yes, it's a very hard problem. Very similar to the problem of consciousness, right? And this is sort of the pickle that Western philosophers have gotten ourselves into. Another use of spontaneity is just to say that something like the grass grows spontaneously. And there's nothing separate about that. There's no free will in the grass. The idea is that it's just subject to the laws of nature and doing what it does. And these two contradictory notions of spontaneity have existed in the literature for centuries. And I think they're indicative of this Western way of viewing the human being's relationship with nature. We have a contradictory view of how we belong to nature or don't belong. We're simultaneously separate from nature, and by a scientific view, we have to be part of nature if we're coming out of that evolutionary process, like you mentioned. And this has never been resolved. in the West. It's a problem that continues to this day. What Ziran does is it doesn't force us into this paradox. Instead, it sees the human beings as fundamentally a part of nature. And from a Taoist perspective, the more natural we are, the more human we are. And this is something that I think is worth exploring further. So it's important to understand when we do comparative philosophy, that's what I consider my discipline, that we don't have to say one way of doing philosophy is better than another, right? So there are many things we can get out of the free will paradox that I just mentioned, and there are many ways to explore it, and there are many reasons to explore it, and many good things can come out of it. But we can add to that. We can also look at the concept of Ziran, and we can explore that, and things can come out of that as well, I think. And that's what the book is about, is exploring it and discussing some of the possibilities of researching it further.
Yeah, beautiful. And it really resonates for me as a way of seeing nature that is inclusive and connecting and grounded in science. Like the grass grows by itself, like spring comes and the grass grows by itself is a classic ancient Chinese phrase. And, the mechanistic view would say the grass grows by itself and it's the laws of nature spontaneously unfolding. Just wondering if you could just elicit a bit more as to how Ziran is differing from that mechanistic view.
Right. So what the Taoists asked is, how is it that we can be more a part of nature? Because we seem to have this ability or this predilection to separate ourselves from nature by overthinking. And so one thing that I've explored is a concept from contemporary psychology called the flow state, which many people are familiar with today. 20, 30 years ago when I first started on this, not so much. And it actually is the case that 20 or 30 years ago, as cognitive science was developing, virtually nobody was researching the cognitive science of flow. There were many teams researching the mind and the various aspects of mind from a cognitive scientist's perspective, using the methods and theories of cognitive science. But at the same time, flow was being researched by behavioral psychologists using their methods and their theories. But the two hadn't been combined. I think the reason they hadn't been combined is that flow didn't fit the paradigm of attention that cognitive scientists were using, which was a paradigm of effort. That when we attend, if you think of doing math problems, for example, those are difficult and it takes effort to pay attention. And a lot of the tests that scientists use in the laboratory also involved a high level of attention and effort. And so scientists naturally began to theorize attention as fundamentally effortful, that there would be no such thing as effortless attention. But of course, the flow state is just that. Part of its definition is that it comes off as effortless. So of course, they wouldn't study that because it didn't fit their paradigm. And that's why I put together a book where I tried to do just that. I tried to look at cognitive science, what a cognitive science of flow would look like. And the book is called Effortless Attention. And since then, there are some research projects. In fact, I'm part of one of them that tries to reconceptualize attention as not only effortful, but also effortless. And the fundamental inspiration of this was the stories in the Zhuangzi about cooking, for instance, cutting up the ox effortlessly, about the cicada catcher who goes out and he concentrates and he catches cicadas. But again, it comes off as effortless, and so on. There are lots of stories like this, and I'm sure you've experienced this in your own life. Athletes often experience it. Musicians often experience it. But it's resistant to laboratory study. So laboratories are beginning to put, say, violinists under fMRIs or EEGs and so on. I'm part of a project now where they're using neurofeedback and EEGs to try to get a sense of what effortless attention is. It's still poorly understood, but I think it's such an important part of our life that it needs to be understood and added to the body of work about what it is to be a human being.
Yeah, and for my journey, that mode of being, Wu Wei, which I think is, each wisdom tradition has something beautiful to offer the world. And I do believe flow, Wu Wei, effortless action, effortless attention is one of the big gifts that Taoism can offer the world. So how do we still, show up in the world as a human being with all these complex needs that need to be worked out, but can it be worked out without effort or minimal forcing? And, that can include thinking, but not excessive thinking where then we're draining our energy. And just to know for me that was an option, really began to transform how I navigated my life. And, with the team and the channel, it's like there's 15 in the team now, and I'm deeply passionate about that. And so I can still take action, but I never rush. That's my affirmation, in the morning. I take big action and I never rush. And so, that effortlessness being an option. Any nuggets on how we can more easily attain that effortless attention?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, again, like with comparative philosophy, I'm not saying that effortful attention is not needed, not necessary, shouldn't be researched, and so on. It's definitely an important part of who we are as well. It's just that the effortless side has been neglected and could be studied to our benefit. As far as cultivating it, I'm very curious about that, and I think that that's a necessary step in the research. So one of the aspects of effortless attention is concentration. And to attain concentration, we have to overcome obstacles. And the obstacles could be external. It could be a distraction down the hallway. It could be things that I'm supposed to attend to but not attending to. And it could be internal. It could be worries. It could be anxieties, and so on. So I think researching these obstacles and learning how to obviate them is part of this process. And people who study meditation, people who do meditation, have already addressed many of these problems, but in ways that are often restricted to the domain of meditation and often couched in a language that is foreign or unfamiliar to the average person. So I think that if they could be studied, and they are being studied, if they could be brought into common ways of speaking, I think it could be very helpful.
At the moment, I'm working on a Taoist meditation course, and I see there's 3 steps and kind of two ways of talking about it: concentration, insight, being, or breathe, let go, be. So we have this wandering mind, the Taoists call the ordinary mind, the Buddhists call monkey mind. And like you said, it's like it separates us from ourselves, from nature, from the world, from our feeling of wholeness. So firstly, steadying that mind. So through the breath, concentrating that awareness, then with that concentration then comes insight as to the ephemeral nature of ourselves and reality, and then through that process letting go, as you described, and then coming into the being, which again, I'm learning more about Wang, sitting in oblivion, sitting in forgetting. And again, like a beautiful gift that Taoism can give us is to then rest into the being, where we merge with the Tao, and even the thinking is, it's not mine, it's just in the flow, and no separation.
Yeah. So part of what you just said has to do with what in philosophy we call the phenomenology of experience, or experiencing itself, right? So what do you feel when you're doing this effortless action that is different from your ordinary way of being, or is different from effortful attention? If you can recognize that, then you're more likely to be able to achieve it again. And I think you just said it, rest in it. And so it's hard to recognize something without the vocabulary for it. And so part of what we need to do as researchers, I think, is to settle some of this vocabulary, to introduce it, to explain it, to define it, and then to spread it. And I think you're doing a good job spreading it. This is a wonderful service that you do, I think, for humanity. And then people will be able, more likely, to integrate it into their lives.
Yeah, practice is the path. And that's something that's really important to me, and brings us on beautifully to wisdom. So yeah, for me, a few understandings of wisdom: knowledge applied, or for me, wisdom is when we see clearly, so clarity, and with that clarity, navigate life with skill. So clarity and skill. And just before we start recording, we were talking about wisdom and ways of understanding it. Yeah, how do you understand wisdom, and why is it important?
Yeah, I think your conception of wisdom is useful. Here's a question for you. How often do you use the term wise or wisdom? How often do you refer to somebody in your life, oh, that person is wise? Or how often do you think to yourself, I wish I could be wiser. I wish I could have more wisdom in my life. You may be an outlier. You may think about it more than the average person, but I'm guessing the average person has the idea of wisdom in their vocabulary, but rarely uses it. What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's like, it's not really a word that's used, but I think it is really important, because for me, it speaks as a quality of integrity. It's like living in alignment with values. So it's not just doing or intelligence, but wisdom speaks to more an integrative approach to life.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And so part of my research also, so this is a separate branch of research from what we were just talking about. I was working with a social psychologist who was researching wisdom. And her research involves actually finding wise people, and then measuring, right? What do they have that other people don't have? And is it possible to measure wisdom? Can you give somebody a survey and gauge, right? Put a number on how wise they are.
And that's it's a funny concept. Like, we were like joking around Zhuangzi, this Taoist philosopher, what he would think about it.
Yeah, it sounds ridiculous, I think, on the face of it, that you could put a number on wisdom, but why not? Right? If one person is wiser than another person, surely there's something tangible about it that we can say, what is it that they have that the other person doesn't have? And if that's the case, then we can put a number on that theoretically and say they have 23% more than somebody else, right, as an approximation. And so that's what this researcher has done. She's created a survey. Monica Ardelt is her name. And it's pretty well accepted now among psychologists. It's not the only one. There are others as well. But I was a little taken aback that a social psychologist was trying to not just measure wisdom, she was trying to cultivate it in her students in an academic setting. And you know that the very word philosopher means a lover of wisdom. And so wisdom has always been the province of philosophy, at least from my perspective. So I thought that if anybody were cultivating wisdom in the classroom, it would have to be it would have to be philosophers, not psychologists. So I decided that maybe I could give the survey to my students in a course I taught called The Philosophies of Life. And so I did that. And she came back to me one day and said, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is that your students' wisdom did not improve over the course of the semester. It was flat. And she says, the good news is that in most college courses, it actually goes down. So you were an improvement.
And just to like land on the fact that most college courses, wisdom goes down, not even flatlining.
Yeah, that's a little depressing. There are some details about that we can talk about if you want that might have to do with stress at the end of the semester as opposed to what's being taught. But anyway, she and I talked about how it might be possible to tweak the class in certain ways, which we did. And then I had a large set of students who went through the class, and we did the pre and post. So we gave the survey at the beginning of the semester and the end of the semester. And finally it went up. And which shows that, I think the important part of this, it shows that wisdom is not some mysterious thing that only a guru in the mountains can confer to their students. But that if you take it seriously, it's somewhat like a lot of people talk about the moonshot as something that originally was considered by many to be impossible. But through a series of very precise, detailed measures was achievable. And I think that something similar can be said for wisdom, that it's not impossible, it's just that we don't have a grasp of exactly what it takes to convey wisdom. And if we look carefully at it, we could actually do it.
What are some of those key qualities of wisdom?
Well, we laid this out in a series of articles, and what I do in my class, she doesn't do this in her classes, so there may be some dispute about this, but I teach some of the classics of philosophy, such as the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, the Buddhist Sutras, the Analects of Confucius. And I think what these do is they open a student's mind to variety of perspectives about how to live life and what's important in life. I think often when we go through our lives, we don't question our values. We don't question our place in the universe. We don't question our relationships with other people from a broad perspective as opposed to a narrow perspective. And what philosophy does is allows us the space to think about these things. And when we think about them, we become more open to other people, to other ideas, to other ways of living. And that openness is one very important aspect of wisdom. When we're unwise, we close ourselves to possibilities. We see only one way of doing things, the right way. And what wisdom does, it allows us more flexibility in our thinking.
There's a song coming to mind with that. You don't have to know the way knows the way. You don't have to plan the way, trust the way, feel the way knows the way knows the way knows the way. So yeah, the openness, the trust.
Well, I like that. I really like that, because I posed the question to some of my students recently, and the question was, it was more of a statement. I wanted to get their take on it, and their take was, no, this doesn't make sense. And the statement was, is it the case that human beings are an example of the universe realizing itself? And they thought, no, that doesn't make sense. The universe, the human being, from their perspective, was something separate, again, separate from the universe, embedded in the universe maybe, but not the universe itself. But the way that your little song there was, we are the way, right? The human being is the way. And so one of the key ideas in Ziran that we haven't talked about is the notion of self-organization. And this is actually, it sounds like a very vague term that we can just throw around in many different ways, but it's actually a very specific scientific term. And it refers to different individuals cooperating to produce actions that are beneficial to the individuals as a group now, as a new level of self. And we see that, for example, a perfect example of that is a cell. A cell is a group of parts, the ribosome and the mitochondria and so on, the DNA, that don't have an orchestrator. There's nobody in the cell saying, do this, do that, do this. The parts work together. And we see this all throughout biology. There's a word that was created to encapsulate this idea called autopoiesis, self-making. That's used sometimes. The more common term is a term from physics called self-organization, which is a kind of complex dynamics. So a key idea in physics is complex dynamic systems. And self-organization is essentially another way of saying that. It's how we get, why is it that we have a law of entropy, which suggests that everything will tend towards a state of disorder, and yet we have all kinds of examples of order? How is that possible? Self-organization is the answer to that. And self-organization is, I think, a fundamental aspect of who we are as human beings, but we don't talk about it. It's not part of our theory. And I think that if it were a part of our theory, we'd be better off for it.
I can't agree more. And for me, like the celebration that comes from that, like we're given a false dichotomy in our cultures. Like you're religious and you have the man in the sky looking down, giving you the commands and keeping a ledger if you've been good or bad, and you go up or down at the end of your life. Then for people that reject that idea, they then have, meaningless particles bashing into each other, materialism, and then a feeling of meaninglessness that comes from that. Well, I'm just a random fluke accident, just somehow spontaneous, intelligent, conscious in an otherwise unintelligent, unspontaneous, automatic, mechanical universe. Then that, again, this alienation, separation that we've talked about. But there's a third option, which is like, all of the self-organizing complexity of nature, which does unfold with laws of nature or forces of nature, if laws is a bit rigid. Then this spontaneous self-organizing is God, it is spirit, it is the mystery, it is the forces of nature, if you want to stay with that word. And for me, what comes from that understanding is a sense of reverence and deep connection, because, as you described, there's no one in the cell telling the cell how to grow. In the forest, there isn't someone with a clipboard telling the oak, right, you're going to be 1 meter higher on Friday, and right, robins, you're going to sing only C# for the rest of the week. You've been a very naughty bird. There's none of that. And to then celebrate this unfolding mystery.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? I'm very happy to talk to you about this. I wonder if there's a fourth option.
Great.
So let's change the order a little bit. So the first option is this monotheistic option. The second option is the meaningless physicalism. The third option, I think, which is more common, is the New Age option, that we are part of a divine universe, that the universe is fundamentally divine, and that we are one part of it. But we have to realize that divinity is deep, deep down in us, and that the world itself is an illusion. That it's not what matters. What matters is that divinity inside us. This is a Hindu version that's often interpreted in New Age beliefs. That, I think, is the third option, and it's quite common in alternative ways of looking at the world. I think the fourth option is the Taoist option, what you're talking about, where we don't see the universe as an illusion. We see the universe as part of who we are, that we are the universe, and not in a divine sense, in the sense of everlasting, that there's this permanent us in an otherwise changing universe, right? That's still a kind of dualism. What the Taoists suggest is that there's change everywhere, all the way down, and that there is no permanence. So there's no divinity in a traditional sense of a permanent conscious presence. What we get instead is we get change up and down. So you come into existence. There was a period when you didn't exist, George. And and there will be a period where you also don't exist as George, right? You self-organized, and then eventually you'll dissolve, and then there'll be other self-organized beings that come in, and those will dissolve, and the parts are all there, and the parts also come into existence and dissolve, right? Atoms come into existence and they dissolve, and this big soup just sort of churns on, where things come into existence and they go away, things come into existence, they go away. And what we need to do is find meaning in that. And we can find meaning in these very brief episodes in which we are a self-organized being.
Yeah, beautifully expressed and so landed. And yeah, like I'm hanging out with spiritual communities these days in the UK, and yeah, just like noticing the dualism. You could talk about it in some ways of like, yeah, there's the divine spark of consciousness within us, and we are consciousness, and then we have a body, as if there's a separation of like, it's still almost like the Descartes motive consciousness, we being a flesh robot, or the body being a flesh robot, we being our mind or consciousness. And yeah, and like popular spirituality, the kind of disassociation that can come, I am not this body, or the Buddhist view that have taken, and what I see as a wrong way of like, yeah, life is an illusion, everything's empty. And yeah, I guess the ego story that we tell about who I am and how I'm messed up in all of these ways, and the rigidity and certainty that I claim upon my understanding of the world, sure, that's an illusion. But I really deeply resonate with what you said in the Taoist approach of, like, I am an aspect of this flow, and the classic metaphor of the wave and the ocean. So yeah, the wave is unique, it's differentiatable, it's noticeable, and it's like me and you, like, this wave's called Brian and this wave's called George. Like, hey, you're in America. Hey, I'm in London. It's like we, create stories, but a wave can't be separate from the ocean. It is the ocean. It's a pattern. And I love the new Confucius approach of Li and Qi. Li, pattern; Qi, energy. Everything's patterned energy. There doesn't need to be mind existing separately coming into this world. Energy, mind, matter, it's all aspects of the same thing.
Right. And they arise spontaneously and they go out of existence. The individuals go out of existence, but the pattern and the energy remain. Yeah. I like it too.
Why do you think because that makes a lot of sense to me. It's systems thinking, so much science backing this approach. Why don't you think it has reached the mainstream yet with this understanding?
I just think it's a little bit early. I
Yeah.
think it will hopefully eventually. The really attractive thing I find is that when we think about nature and science together, the fundamental belief is that human beings are a part of nature. And the role of science is to investigate that. And so there isn't then a separation between science and religion, right? If you think of religion as an investigation or a study or an appreciation of the values of the human being and how we fit in with the cosmos, then there's no separation anymore between science and religion. That the more we do science, the more we can have a religious viewpoint. And the more we do religion well, the more integration there is with science. And that's what I find really attractive about this way of seeing the world. The technical term that philosophers use is naturalism. Naturalism is the belief that there's nothing supernatural out there.
Because nature is super.
Because nature is super enough. Yeah. And naturalism is a bridge then. If you're a naturalist, it's a bridge between the science and the religion. So I'm working on a book now called Religion is Philosophy. And the idea is to look at the philosophies that I mentioned to you before, Marcus Aurelius, Buddhism, Confucianism, and also the Gospels of Jesus, and to look at them as not religions in the classic sense of something separate from academic discourse, but as attempts at understanding our place in the world, and then opening them to critique, right? What did they get right, and what is inconsistent with what we know about how the world works, and using that as a springboard for trying to understand our own places in the universe.
Such important questions. And yeah, that connection that can come from that support. Like my understanding of the word spirituality is my understanding of something bigger, my understanding of my relationship to something bigger than myself, and the extent to which that understanding is a resource to support me. So it's both the understanding and then the resourcing that can come from that understanding.
Right. And this is difficult. Having the big picture view and living our life in a day-to-day manner is difficult. In order to focus on the things that matter in the moment, we often lose our sight of our place in the world. And that affects our values, right? Because our values come from how we feel about where we belong in the world. What is our relationship to our country? What is our relationship to our fellow human being outside the boundaries of patriotism, right? Do we have such an obligation? And when we go through our day-to-day life and we draw the distinctions, the common distinctions, us versus them, we see ourselves as part of this small group, part of this small family, part of this small university, part of this neighborhood, part of the state, part of the country. And we identify with those and we forget about these larger values. And what philosophy does, I think, is it helps us, I think we started by saying this, is it helps us maintain this multi-layered integration of ourselves with the things that really matter, although we often forget about them. So I think the work that you're doing, trying to help people be philosophical in a way that's outside the academy, is maybe one of the most important things that anybody can do, right? We do it in the academy. It's very simple because we have very specific standards, right? We know in the academy how to do it. We give you books to read, you read the books, and then we talk about them. Maybe you write a paper, and then we're done. You go on your way, and I do another class. Outside of the academy, it's hard to do philosophy. And that's why I think we have religions. Religions make it easy to do philosophy. They situate you in the big picture. And they give you values. They tell you this is what's important. This is what matters. Here's some books to read to help you integrate yourself into this way of seeing the world. This is what religions do for us. But what we forget when we do religion is that these are theories, really. A religion is a theory about how things fit together. And we forget that. We forget that maybe this part of it is incorrect, or maybe that part of it could be expanded some way. That's philosophy. And philosophy is hard because we're questioning our fundamental values. And that's a big project. We don't have time for that. So doing popular philosophy, I think, is probably the hardest thing there is to do. Akin to nuclear physics and brain surgery, right? People say these are the hard things. It's not brain surgery. It's like doing brain surgery. It's really hard, I think.
Well, it seems both of our life missions has turned into that. And so like there's stories, and I mean that with great reverence and celebration. Right. We need stories because like we're constantly like, who am I? Asking that question in every moment is exhausting. Like, we need that kind of background comfort of our understanding. And these stories are given by our society, by religion, family, often going unexamined. And religion is, in some ways, rightfully, is like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel every generation, every new birth. Like, you're a human being. We've been around for a very long time, and actually, give some humility and gratitude to your ancestors. We've worked out some stuff. But then, to not question and not to examine what these stories are saying, then it leads to a dead, like, for me, like the difference between knowledge and wisdom, like knowledge is in the book, wisdom is lived. So these are beautiful pointers as to how to live a beautiful, harmonious, nourishing life. But if it isn't applied and integrated and really with discernment, then it becomes a dead and then even dangerous understanding.
Right. It's like living in an outdated scientific theory, right? Suppose that we still believed that the sun revolves around the earth, and we lived our lives according to that, or we lived our lives according to a belief that the earth is flat without questioning it. I think that's what we do when we live according to religious tenets that we don't question.
And the mission statement of our organization, or like a theory of change, is change your story, change the world. And so these stories are super foundational because, say we solve climate change and we get the carbon dioxide emissions back to a safe level, but we still are in an exponential growth economic model on a finite planet, which is just inherently unsustainable, then it will lead to the continued pillage of our society and the corporatization of this planet. And so, if we don't look at the real story as to like, what are we doing with all this economic power that we've developed? Why is it important? What's it in service of? Then that's human wisdom. That has to be the thing that develops. Because it's technology is not going to save us, AI is not going to save us, it's human wisdom that's going to save us. And can we, and it's quite a nice message of hope as well, of like you saying it's early days, because it does seem, as the climate crisis will get worse, there will be a point at which it will be pretty undeniable that it's happening. So then it's like, oh, wow, okay, those environmentalists, they were onto something. We are part of an interconnected whole. We're not separate from it, and we can't just continually ignore the health of our body, our earth body, and just pretend that isn't something that exists because I can't see it and it's not in my town.
Right. But these stories are super powerful, like you said. I was watching a TikTok video or it wasn't TikTok. I don't do TikTok anymore. It was an Instagram video, which is essentially the same thing. And it was this, I don't know how it came up in my feed, because it was sort of anathema to the things that I usually look at, but maybe because it's just very popular. It had a guy talking to his future self, or a future person, like in 50 years from now. He was time traveling. And he was talking to this future person, saying, how did you survive the apocalypse? And assuming, right, that there was some kind of apocalypse coming. And this future person said, oh, there was no apocalypse. What happened was Jesus came back and saved us from everything. And this is the power of a story, the power that can have us neglecting reality, and taking pressing issues and sweeping them into the carpet, thinking that some savior will come and make everything all right. So providing alternative stories, like you're saying, is super important, I think.
Beautiful. And as we begin to wrap up our conversation, I'd love to, the beautiful people that are listening, they're curious, they've reached this point that in this conversation that, they care about the world. They want to learn more about themselves and our place in the universe. Have you got any words of wisdom, encouragement, anything that you think could support them on their journey?
Yeah, I think that the way that you characterize these people as curious really matters, is that you don't lose your curiosity as you go through life, that you continue to investigate. I once thought that if I found the right spirituality, the right book, the right guru, and then settled on that I could just live that way my whole life, and I wouldn't have to worry about that anymore. I could just go on with my day-to-day life. And what I found is we need to keep reading. We need to keep listening. We need to keep investigating. And instead of settling on one way of living in the world, we need to keep interrogating it. That doesn't mean spend every hour every day sitting in a chair looking out the window thinking about things. But it does mean keeping a book by your bedstand, reading when you're on the subway, trying to understand new voices and new ways of seeing the world. Because we're raised in what's called common knowledge. And that common knowledge, you brought it up a minute ago. If you think of capitalism per se, capitalism's done a lot of good in the world, but it also has its limits. What are its limits, right? When is something gone too far? When is monetizing something not the right way to go? There are no easy answers to these questions. And so we have to continually, and the world is changing, so we have to continually keep reading, keep investigating, keep talking, keep adjusting as we go through life. And there's a joy in that. I think you mentioned there's a joy in curiosity and discovery and learning. One thing that struck me when I was reading up on the cognitive science of curiosity is that when we learn something, we actually receive what in common knowledge or common parlance is called a dopamine hit. So people talk about social media as these little dopamine hits and how they're not good because they're making us addicted to it. But dopamine itself is actually a good thing because it motivates us. And learning is part of that dopaminergic process. And I think we shouldn't forget that. Learning is not, it's often discussed as something that is effortful again, and something that we should shy away from, but it's not. Learning is a natural part of what it is to be a human being, and we should keep doing it and have fun and enjoy it. And that will help us live, I think, life filled not just with knowledge, but with wisdom.
So beautiful. And yeah, the cognitive science of curiosity, that piqued my ears. That would have to be a future conversation. That sounds yummy. And yeah, wow, what a beautiful, beautiful conversation. And if people want to find out more about what you're doing, how could they find out?
They can Google me, and they'll be able to find, I think anything they want. Yeah, they can email me too. I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Yeah, great. And we'll link in the description some of Professor Brian Bruya's books, and CC Tsai's animated comics, which you've translated, have been really foundational and fun books, curiosity piquing books for me on my journey. So yeah, we'll link those down below as well. Thank you for so much for your time. Really grateful for this conversation.
Yeah, pleasure talking to you, George. I hope we can do it again.